Hey guys, we're back and we're dealing with exploring world history, lesson number 7. The title of this lesson is Sin. And you might be thinking, hey, Mr. Jeff, what does sin have to do with history? Well, it's going to depend on your worldview. If your point of view, okay? If you have a worldview, who cares? But if you have a godly view of history, then sin is extremely important and we must understand it to be able to know exactly what's going on and through history and what's causes some of these things. So the order to understand sin, we have to go back to creation, okay? We've talked about creation some already. And you go back to the very beginning where God made man in his image, okay? We're spiritual beings that were made in the image of God. We rule over the physical world and we're supposed to have fellowship with God. But because when Adam and Eve chose to sin, they broke that connection with God in some ways. And so then we had a spiritual death where we were separated from God, as well as it created a physical death. And that was all because of sin. So the rest of it that happens from that point was affected and caused and partly caused because of sin, okay? So we cannot understand history unless we have a grasp of the role that sin has played in it, okay? And we're not going to get into a lot of detail about sin and exactly, what is a sin and what is not a sin. But we need to understand a few things. First and foremost, sin is real, okay? We're all born into sin, as the Bible says, and we all have sinned, okay? And sin has consequences. It has consequences for this life and the afterlife, the next life. It has consequences for us as well as for others. Our sin can have consequences, not just for ourselves, but as far as for others as well. So, and we need to understand that. A very brief, quick kind of definition of sin is a selfish desire, okay? Something that originates in the heart and leads to wrong actions. Things that we should not be doing. And some of us could probably think of, a few things we've already done today that we shouldn't have done, and that would be a sin, okay? So what happens when we do sin? What things that occur? Again, let's go back to look at what Adam and Eve did, okay? First thing that happened, they were stricken with guilt. All of a sudden, they're like, oh my goodness, we shouldn't have done that, right? Then they tried to hide it from God. Then they started blaming others, right? Oh, it was Satan's fault. Man said what? Adam said, wasn't me, God. It was the woman's fault, right? And you look at that, we do the exact same things, right? Well, I wouldn't have done that, but so-and-so was doing it too, or, they talked me into it. You guys can think of your own excuses probably better than I can because, when I was your age, I had a lot of good excuses. But, so, we have these things that occur, so we know sin. So let's look at some of the sins in the Bible that just kind of, we've already talked about some, or we'll talk about. First is Cain killed Abel, right? Pretty big sin right there. Then we have Noah built an ark. Why did Noah build the ark? Well, the Bible says because so many people at that point were living in sin. God decided to get rid of them because they were so sinful. He also had the Tower of Babel and many other things that go on and on throughout history, okay? And again, like I said, just real quick, kind of brief little lesson about sin. We can dig into it more. You can dig into it more with your parents or teachers or each other. But it's important to realize that's where it starts, okay? We have to have a grasp on what it is. So what about the cycle of sin? There's some things that occur, okay? It first starts with a wrong action based on wrong thinking. Then there's a prideful desires and lack of trust in God. And then attempts to justify our wrong actions, right? We all say, well, I should have been able to do that because, right? Many people being affected by the sin of one or a few. That happens a lot throughout history, right? Even, in your own families. You ever get in trouble because your brother or sister did something? You all were supposed to go somewhere, and then suddenly you can't because, or maybe you're the one that messed it up and sinned, and now everybody has to suffer that punishment. It happens. So many people being affected by the sin of one or few. And then also what happens is people try to make a name for themselves, right? They start acting out and doing different things and trying to be like, oh, I'm important for this reason. And it causes problems. So we need to make sure that we're very careful with our actions and realize that our actions do have consequences. And